Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a long, slow journey back in time, not to the land of epic battles or dramatic pharaonic intrigues, but to a place far more still. Imagine yourself, if you will, not soaring over the Nile in a hot air balloon, but standing right there, ankle deep in the ancient silt, feeling the warmth radiating up from the parched earth. The sun beats down, not with a harsh, glaring intensity, but with a golden, sleepy haze, blurring the edges of the distant desert. You can almost feel the fine dust tickle your nose, a dust composed of millennia of history, of sandstone and limestone, of sweat and ingenuity. We're going to lean into the silence, the sheer, mind-numbing effort that went into shaping the very landscape of ancient Egypt. Forget your modern conveniences, your power tools, your laser-guided precision. Tonight, we're stripping it all back, right down to the raw stone and the calloused hands that coaxed wonders from it. You probably won't survive this, not with your modern attention span anyway. This isn't a thrill ride. It's a deep, deliberate dive into the lost art of stone carving, a craft so profoundly patient and repetitive, it's practically a lullaby. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling up to it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where you're all drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the banks of the mighty Nile, the lifeblood of this ancient civilization, a winding ribbon of blue-green cutting through the stark ochre of the desert. But you're not just admiring the view. You're feeling the ground beneath your bare feet, a composite of countless tiny grains, each with a story stretching back eons. It's here, in this very earth, that our story truly begins. Long before the first chisel struck stone, long before the first pharaoh dreamed of eternity. The geology of the Nile Valley, my friends, isn't just a backdrop. It's the very foundation of everything we associate with ancient Egypt's enduring legacy. Think about it. What makes a civilization build colossal structures out of stone when mud brick would suffice for shelter? It's the sheer abundance and accessibility of the material itself. The Nile, in its relentless journey from the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean, isn't just a source of water and fertile soil. It's also a tireless sculptor, carving out valleys and exposing layers of rock that would otherwise remain hidden. You see the cliffs rising on either side of the river. Those aren't just pretty backdrops for a sunset cruise. They're the ancient quarries, the raw material warehouses of a civilization obsessed with permanence. The primary players in this geological drama are sandstone and limestone. Limestone, in particular, was the workhorse of the Old Kingdom, the material of choice for the majestic pyramids and many of the early mastaba tombs. Imagine walking through the Giza Plateau. You're not just looking at massive blocks. You're looking at what was once soft, sedimentary rock, laid down layer by layer over millions of years by the ebb and flow of ancient seas. It's quite humbling, really, to think that the very material of eternity was once squishy seabed. This limestone was relatively easy to quarry, especially the softer varieties found closer to the surface, which meant it could be cut and shaped with less effort than, say, the granite we'll discuss later. You could, in theory, almost scoop it out with a very large, very blunt spoon. Don't try this at home unless you have a time machine and a lot of very patient supervisors. Further south, as you drift gently downriver, you start to encounter more sandstone. This became increasingly popular in the New Kingdom, particularly for the vast temple complexes of Karnak and Luxor. Sandstone, as its name suggests, is essentially compressed sand, and it often has a beautiful, rich, reddish hue, especially in the setting sun. It's a bit harder than much of the limestone, requiring more elbow grease and perhaps a slightly grumpier disposition from the quarry workers. But its durability made it ideal for the grand, sprawling temples designed to last for millennia. You can still see the chisel marks on some of these blocks, almost as fresh as the day they were made, an enduring testament to the stone's resilience and the carver's painstaking labor. But wait, beyond these common building blocks, ancient Egyptians also sought out rarer, more challenging stones for specific purposes: granite, basalt, diorite, and alabaster. Think of these as the luxury materials, the bling of the ancient world. Granite, that incredibly hard, crystalline rock, often flecked with black, white, and pink, was reserved for sarcophagi, obelisks, and the most important structural elements of temples. It was a nightmare to work with, requiring tools that would make modern masons weep. You couldn't just chip away at granite. You had to pound it, grind it, abrade it, often using even harder stones as your hammers. It's like trying to cut a steak with a butter knife if the steak was also trying to resist with the force of 1,000 angry oxen. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians employed some form of protodiamond or merely relied on sheer, unadulterated brute force and an incomprehensible amount of time to work these recalcitrant rocks. Then there's basalt, a dense, dark, volcanic rock often used for pavements and statues, requiring a weighty, imposing presence. Diorite, even harder than granite, was favored for some of the most enduring and finely polished statues, such as the famous seated statue of Kafir. Imagine trying to carve a perfectly smooth, jet-black surface out of a rock that practically laughs at your copper tools. It boggles the mind. And finally, alabaster, that translucent, creamy white stone, so soft and luminous, was perfect for canopic jars, ritual vessels, and delicate cosmetic palettes. It whispers of luxury and refinement, a stark contrast to the gritty practicality of the other stones. The locations of these quarries were crucial. The limestone quarries were often just a stone's throw from the construction sites, especially around Memphis and Giza. The Tura quarries, for instance, just south of modern-day Cairo, provided much of the fine white limestone used for the casing. Stones of the Great Pyramid, which, fun fact, originally shone like a beacon in the desert, polished to a brilliant sheen. Imagine that, a gigantic, sparkling monument that could probably be seen from space, if anyone had been up there to look. This proximity significantly reduced the logistical nightmare of transporting truly massive blocks. But for the harder, more exotic stones, the Egyptians had to venture further afield. Aswan, way down south, was the primary source of the pink granite that graces so many temples and obelisks. Think about the scale of that operation. Not only did they have to extract these colossal blocks, often weighing hundreds of tons, but then they had to transport them hundreds of miles north, often by floating them down the Nile on specially constructed barges during the annual inundation. It was a feat of logistics and engineering that would make modern supply chain managers break out in a cold sweat. You can almost hear the rhythmic chant of the workers, the splash of the water, the creak of the ropes, as these impossibly heavy loads slowly made their way to their final resting places. The understanding of these geological properties was not just academic, it was deeply practical. The ancient Egyptians knew their rocks. They knew which stones were brittle, which were tough, which fractured along predictable lines, and which offered the most resistance. This intimate knowledge, passed down through generations of quarrymen and carvers, was as vital to their success as any tool. They weren't just blindly smashing at rocks. They were engaging in a sophisticated dance with the earth itself, understanding its weaknesses and strengths. You can almost picture an ancient quarry master stroking his beard, nodding sagely at a fresh rock face, discerning its hidden qualities before a single blow was struck. This wasn't merely a craft, it was a conversation with the very bones of the earth. So, as you slowly drift further into this quiet story, remember that every magnificent statue, every towering obelisk, every enduring pyramid began not with a grand design on papyrus, but with the silent, geological gifts of the Nile Valley. It started with a specific type of rock in a specific location, waiting patiently for the hands that would transform it from inert stone into eternal symbol. The earth, in its generosity, provided the canvas. The Egyptians, in their unwavering perseverance, provided the art. It's a partnership that echoes through the ages, a testament to how deeply intertwined a civilization can be with its natural environment. You can almost feel the vibrations of those ancient quarries humming with the promise of future masterpieces. Asterisk. Now, with the vast geological pantry of Egypt laid out before us, the next logical step, and perhaps the most mind-boggling, is to consider the actual instruments of creation. You have all this magnificent stone, from the relatively soft limestone to the diamond-hard diorite. But how do you actually work it? This isn't a trip to your local hardware store where you can pick up a diamond-tipped saw or a pneumatic chisel. No, we're talking about an age before iron was common, an age where the cutting edge of technology was well, copper, and a lot of elbow grease. Imagine you're an ancient Egyptian stone carver. You wake up with the sun, the desert air already warm, and you head to the workshop. What do you grab? Your trusty copper chisel, perhaps. Yes, but hold on a moment. Copper, as you might recall from any basic science class, is a relatively soft metal. It's malleable, ductile, great for wiring, but not exactly renowned for its rock-shattering capabilities. Trying to carve granite with a copper chisel is a bit like trying to cut a steak with a jelly spoon. Frustrating, largely ineffective, and likely to result in a bent spoon and a very annoyed chef. So, how did they do it? The answer, as with many things in ancient Egypt, is a combination of ingenious application, sheer persistence, and a surprising understanding of material properties. For the softer stones, like limestone and some sandstones, copper chisels were indeed used. But these weren't just any copper chisels. They were often hardened through a process of cold working, repeatedly hammering the copper to make it denser and slightly tougher. Think of it like a blacksmith beating a piece of iron, only with a much less forgiving material. Even then, these chisels would dull quickly, requiring constant resharpening, a task that occupied a significant portion of a carver's day. You'd have to imagine a rhythm of striking, dulling, sharpening, striking again. It sounds less like carving and more like an advanced form of meditation through repetitive motion. But copper chisels alone simply wouldn't cut it for the harder stones. This is where the real genius, and perhaps the most boringly brilliant, aspect of ancient Egyptian stone carving comes into play: the use of even harder stones as tools. This might sound circular. You use stone to carve stone, but it's precisely what they did. For breaking off large chunks of granite or basalt from the quarry face, or for shaping the rough contours of a colossal statue they didn't reach for a metal tool. Instead, they wielded large, often spherical, dolerite or diorite pounders. Dolerite, a dense, dark, igneous rock, is incredibly tough and abrasive. Imagine a bowling ball, but made of something even more unyielding. These pounders, weighing anywhere from a few pounds to 100 pounds or more, were swung with immense force, often by 2 or 3 men, repeatedly smashing against the target rock. This wasn't cutting, it was percussion. It was the sustained application of blunt force, slowly, incrementally, pulverizing the surface of the harder stone. You can still see the evidence of this in the Aswan Quarry, where unfinished obelisks bear the telltale pockmarks of countless dolerite blows. It looks less like carving and more like someone attempted to play extreme golf with the earth itself. This technique, known as pecking or bruising, was incredibly labor-intensive. You're not chipping off neat pieces. You're essentially pulverizing the rock's surface bit by tiny bit until you've reduced it to a fine powder or detached small flakes. This dust, often silica-rich, would have been a constant companion to the workers, clinging to their skin, filling their lungs. Modern safety regulations would have a field day with an ancient Egyptian quarry. Historians still argue whether these pounders were simply held in the hand or occasionally fitted with some kind of primitive handle. Given the sheer weight of some, a handle seems sensible, but archaeological evidence for such attachments is scarce, leading some to believe they were often used freehand, relying on raw strength and momentum. Once the rough shape was achieved, the work became more refined, but still relied on abrasive techniques for grinding down surfaces, smoothing out irregularities, and even creating intricate details. The Egyptians employed various forms of abrasive powders. The most common, and arguably the most crucial, was quartz sand. Yes, ordinary sand, the kind you find on a beach, though often a coarser variety. Mixed with water, this sand became a powerful grinding paste. Imagine rubbing 2 pieces of stone together with sand and water between them. The hard, angular grains of quartz slowly abrade the softer stone. It's slow, it's messy, but it's incredibly effective, especially for achieving those famously smooth, polished surfaces. For even harder stones, or for drilling holes, they sometimes employed emery, a natural corundum rock, which is significantly harder than quartz. This would have been used with a drill, perhaps a bow drill for smaller holes, or a large, spindle-like drill rotated by hand or with ropes for larger ones. Think of it, a rotating stick, some abrasive powder and water, slowly, painstakingly, boring a perfect cylindrical hole through granite. It beggars belief, yet the evidence is there. You see perfectly drilled core holes in many artifacts, sometimes with spiral grooves left by the abrasive paste, a silent testament to the technology. And what about cutting? How did they make those incredibly straight lines and flat surfaces? For limestone and sandstone, they likely used copper saws, again, without teeth in the modern sense. Instead, these saws would have been flat copper blades used in conjunction with abrasive sand and water. The saw wouldn't cut the stone itself. It would merely act as a guide, pushing the abrasive grains across the surface, slowly wearing a kerf through the material. It's like endlessly running a blunt knife through a block of cheese, with invisible, gritty helpers doing the actual cutting. For truly massive blocks, it's hypothesized that they might have used long ropes embedded with sand as a kind of giant, primitive string saw. This is where the quirky tidbit comes in. There's even speculation that some of the largest cuts might have involved wooden wedges soaked in water to expand and split the rock, a technique known from other ancient cultures. But direct evidence in Egypt is limited. For intricate details, smaller chisels, points, and drills made of harder stones or very finely worked copper would have been employed. Imagine painstakingly carving the delicate features of a pharaoh's face, not with a precision steel tool, but with a piece of sharpened flint or a tiny copper point, constantly needing to be reworked. It required not just skill, but an almost superhuman patience and an incredibly light touch, especially for the finishing work. The final polishing to achieve that almost mirror-like sheen on granite or diorite was achieved by prolonged rubbing with fine abrasives and possibly leather or cloth pads. This was not a quick buff. It was hours, days, weeks of continuous, repetitive motion, slowly bringing out the stone's inherent luster. The sheer scale of effort involved is staggering. Imagine an army of workers, not with shovels and pickaxes, but with stone hammers and bags of sand, toiling under the relentless sun, the air thick with dust, the rhythmic thudding of pounders, the rasping sound of grinding, the constant chatter of voices, and the occasional groan as a heavy stone shifted. This wasn't a quiet, contemplative, artistic endeavor for a single sculptor. It was an industrial-scale operation, a symphony of brute force and meticulous persistence. And let's not forget the human element. The tools weren't just inert objects. They were extensions of human will and muscle. The strength required, the endurance, the precision, even in crude operations, speaks volumes about the physical prowess and dedication of these ancient craftsmen. There were no ergonomic handles, no shock absorbers. Every impact reverberated through their hands, arms, and shoulders. You get the sense that after a day of stone carving, a hot bath and a strong drink would be in order, though perhaps those amenities were in short supply. The ingenuity lay not in developing revolutionary new materials, but in understanding the limitations of their existing ones and finding clever ways to circumvent them. They couldn't make tools harder than the hardest stones, but they could use the hardest stones as tools. They couldn't cut quickly, but they could grind endlessly. This methodical, unhurried approach, born of necessity and deep material knowledge, allowed them to create works that defy our modern understanding of technology. Historians still puzzle over the exact sequence of some of these techniques, especially for the largest and hardest pieces. Did they rough hew with pounders, then refine with copper, saws, and sand, then finish with finer abrasives? Or was there a more fluid, overlapping process? The truth is, it likely varied depending on the stone, the size, and the specific workshop. So, as you picture the ancient Egyptian craftsman, remember not the gleaming, perfectly formed statue, but the tools that birthed it, the sturdy dolerite pounder, worn smooth by countless blows, the simple copper chisel, perpetually in need of resharpening, and the ubiquitous gritty sand, the unsung hero of countless polished surfaces. These humble implements, guided by skilled hands and unimaginable patience, were the true architects of Egypt's enduring stone legacy. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the simplest tools, applied with relentless dedication, can achieve the most extraordinary results. You can almost feel the vibration of those pounders echoing through the millennia. With a foundational understanding of the stones themselves and the deceptively simple, yet profoundly effective, tools used to work them, our journey now takes us to the very beginning of the creative process, the quarry. This isn't just about picking up a few rocks. It's about extracting colossal quantities of stone, often hundreds of tons for a single block, from the living earth. Imagine, if you will, not a peaceful stroll through a park, but the cacophony and dust of an ancient industrial site, humming with human effort. You find yourself standing at the edge of a vast pit, perhaps the Tura limestone quarry, or the immense granite works at Aswan. The air is thick with fine dust that catches in your throat, a gritty taste that lingers. The sun beats down with an almost oppressive intensity, reflecting off the pale stone, making your eyes water even through squinted lids. The first challenge for the ancient Egyptians was finding the right stone. This wasn't guesswork. Quarry masters, men of immense practical knowledge and keen geological insight, would scour the cliffs and riverbanks, looking for rock formations that were not only suitable in type and quality, but also accessible. They needed areas where the rock layers were relatively free of cracks or fault lines that could compromise the integrity of a large block. It was a painstaking process of observation and reconnaissance, likely passed down through generations. Think of them as ancient geologists, but with hammers instead of handheld GPS units. Once a suitable vein of stone was identified, the real work began. For limestone and sandstone, the process typically involved a combination of undercutting and leverage. Imagine a sheer rock face. The Egyptians would first clear away any overburdened loose sand, rubble, or inferior rock to expose the clean, solid layers beneath. Then, they would begin to carve channels. Using their copper chisels and stone hammers, they would slowly, painstakingly cut deep trenches around the desired block. These channels weren't just decorative. They were the crucial first step in detaching the stone from its parent bedrock. Picture a long, narrow trench, perhaps just wide enough for a single worker to crouch inside, chipping away at the stone. This trench would be cut horizontally along the base of the block and vertically down its sides. It was incredibly slow, tedious work. You are hunched over, swinging a hammer, watching as tiny fragments of rock chip away, dust coating your entire body. The air in these confined spaces would have been stifling, the noise echoing off the rock faces. It was a monotonous, physically grueling task that demanded incredible stamina and a high tolerance for discomfort. Historians still argue whether they always cut all four sides of a block, or sometimes exploited natural fissures in the rock, incorporating them into their cutting plan to save effort. Given their pragmatic approach, it's highly likely they used whatever nature offered. Once the channels were sufficiently deep, the final stage of detachment began. This often involved leveraging the block away from the bedrock, using large wooden levers. Imagine enormous wooden beams, perhaps reinforced with copper bands, inserted into strategic points beneath or around the block. Then, with the synchronized effort of many men, perhaps chanting a rhythmic work song, they would apply immense force to pry the block free. Sometimes, it's believed, they might have exploited natural fractures or used a series of small holes drilled into a line into which wooden wedges were inserted. These wedges would then be soaked with water, causing the wood to expand and exert pressure, eventually splitting the rock along the desired line. This technique, while clever, is more widely attested in Roman quarrying than Egyptian, but the possibility exists for certain applications. For the much harder stones, like granite, the process was even more arduous, relying almost entirely on percussion and abrasion. You're back at the Aswan quarry, surrounded by unfinished obelisks still partially embedded in the earth. Here, the primary method was pecking or bruising, using those heavy dolerite pounders we discussed. Workers would systematically pound the surface of the granite, creating a series of shallow depressions along the intended lines of cut. This wasn't about slicing through the rock, it was about pulverizing it, weakening its crystalline structure until it could be detached. Imagine dozens, perhaps hundreds, of men standing shoulder to shoulder, rhythmically swinging their stone pounders. The air would be filled with the deafening sound of stone striking stone, a constant, dull thudding that would reverberate through the ground and your very bones. Each swing removed only a minuscule amount of material, perhaps just a few grams, of granite dust, to create a deep trench, let alone detach a massive obelisk, required millions upon millions of these individual impacts. It's a testament to human endurance, or perhaps stubbornness, on a scale that's difficult to comprehend in our age of instant gratification. This isn't just work, it's a marathon of sustained, repetitive, high-impact labor. After the initial detachment, the rough shaping of the block would begin, often right there in the quarry. This saved effort in transporting excess material. If they were cutting an obelisk, for instance, they'd start to define its rectangular cross-section. If it was a statue, the basic human form might begin to emerge. This further shaping reduced the overall weight, making the arduous task of transport slightly less daunting. You can still see partially carved figures and columns in various ancient quarries, abandoned for reasons unknown, perhaps a fatal flaw in the stone, an accident, or a change in a pharaoh's plans. These unfinished pieces are incredibly valuable. Two archaeologists offering a frozen snapshot of the carving process, like a paused documentary from 4,000 years ago. Once a block was detached and roughly shaped, the next challenge was moving it. For smaller blocks, ramps, rollers, and human muscle were the primary movers. Picture hundreds of workers, perhaps lubricated with water or silt, pulling a stone block on a sled over greased timbers. The sheer coordination required, the synchronized pulling, the need to constantly adjust rollers would have been immense. It's a logistical ballet on a grand scale with no margin for error. A single misstep could lead to a catastrophic accident, crushing workers and damaging the precious stone. The quirky tidbit here is that some theories suggest they might have even used wet sand to reduce friction, essentially liquefying the ground beneath the sled, making it easier to pull. This would explain some ancient depictions that show water being poured in front of sleds for the truly colossal blocks, like those intended for obelisks or massive temple components. River transport was essential. The Nile, in its annual flood, transformed into a superhighway. Imagine a specially constructed barge, perhaps even a pair of barges lashed together, designed to carry hundreds of tons of stone. The block would be carefully loaded onto the barge, probably by slowly dragging it down an inclined ramp to the water's edge, then carefully maneuvering the barge underneath, allowing the water to lift it. This would have been a high-stakes operation, reliant on precise timing with the river's rise and fall. Once loaded, the block would be transported downstream, perhaps hundreds of miles, propelled by oars, sails, or simply the current, to its destination. The final stage of quarrying and transport involved precise positioning. At the construction site, the blocks would again be moved using ramps, levers, and human power. For the pyramids, immense earth and rubble ramps were built, spiraling up the sides of the growing structures. The blocks were pulled up these ramps, then carefully maneuvered into their exact positions. This required not only strength, but an incredible understanding of geometry and engineering, ensuring each block fit perfectly, without the need for mortar in many cases. The precision of some of these joints, even for multi-ton blocks, is astonishing, to the point where you can't insert a credit card between them. Historians still argue whether the ramps were straight, winding, or a combination, and how they managed to maintain the necessary slope for such heavy loads. The sheer organizational prowess required for these operations is often overlooked. It wasn't just individual laborers. It was a highly organized system involving thousands of skilled and unskilled workers, engineers, overseers, and scribes, keeping meticulous records. The pharaoh himself, through his viziers and high officials, commanded these vast projects, mobilizing resources on a scale almost unimaginable for the ancient world. It was a true testament to centralized authority and the capacity for collective human endeavor. So, when you next gaze upon an ancient Egyptian monument, don't just see the finished product. Close your eyes and imagine the quarry, the sun-baked rock face, the rhythmic thud of pounders, the fine dust swirling in the air, the grunts and shouts of men straining against immense weight, the creak of timber, the splash of water. Imagine the journey, the slow, deliberate pull across the desert, the silent drift down the Nile, the laborious climb up the ramps. It was a process steeped in arduous physical labor, ingenious problem-solving, and a profound connection to the very earth beneath their feet. Every block tells a story, not just of what it became, but of the immense, forgotten journey it took from the heart of the earth to the sky. Asterisk. Having brought our colossal block of stone from the quarry to the construction site, perhaps having transported it down the mighty Nile on a specially constructed barge, we now stand at the precipice of its true transformation. No longer is it just a raw piece of earth. It is a future component of a monument, a nascent sculpture, a whisper of eternity. The next stage, shaping the rough, is where the brute force of extraction gives way to a more deliberate, though still incredibly vigorous, application of force. You're no longer breathing the dust of the quarry, but the finer, more pervasive dust of shaping, a constant cloud clinging to everything. The air vibrates with the rhythmic sound of mallet on chisel, a percussive symphony that defines the construction site. Imagine your block, perhaps a massive piece of limestone or an imposing slab of sandstone, now resting on a prepared foundation or a sturdy platform. It's still largely amorphous, a rough approximation of its final form. This is where the initial blocking out or roughing out begins. The goal here is not to create fine detail, but to remove vast amounts of excess material to pare down the gargantuan chunk into something resembling the desired shape, whether that's a pyramid block, a temple column, or the initial contours of a colossal statue. For limestone and sandstone, the process would begin with points and broad chisels, usually made of hardened copper. Picture a craftsman, perhaps stripped to the waist, sweat glistening on his skin, gripping a sturdy wooden mallet. He places the point of his copper chisel against the stone, judging the angle, anticipating the fracture. Then, with a grunt of effort, he brings the mallet down, a solid, resounding thwack that echoes across the construction site. Fragments of stonefly, sometimes startlingly large, requiring vigilant eye protection, though safety goggles in ancient Egypt were likely. Just a good squint and a prayer. This isn't delicate work. It's about brute removal, breaking the stone down into manageable pieces. You can almost feel the vibration travel up the chisel, through the mallet, and into the carver's arms. It's a relentless, high-impact activity. The copper chisels would dull incredibly quickly, necessitating constant resharpening by assistants, or perhaps even by the carvers themselves during brief, exhausted pauses. This constant dulling and sharpening meant that a significant portion of the work was not just carving, but tool maintenance. It's a bit like trying to write a novel, but every few sentences you have to stop and rink your pen. Incredibly inefficient by modern standards, but the only option available. For larger areas, or for creating broad, flat surfaces, a broader chisel might be used, often struck repeatedly along a line to create a channel, then levered off. Think of it like trying to level a very lumpy cake, but your knife is dull, and you're using a hammer to push it through. The process would be methodical, working across the surface, gradually reducing the bulk, making the initial outlines of the object emerge. If it were a pyramid block, the goal was to achieve remarkably precise right angles and flat faces, ensuring it would fit snugly with its neighbors. The margin for error was surprisingly small, given the tools. When working with harder stones like granite, the method changed dramatically. Copper chisels were largely useless for direct cutting. Here, the dolerite pounders would be the primary tools once again, but used with greater precision than at the quarry face. Imagine men using smaller, handheld pounders, or even larger ones swung by two men, carefully pecking away at the granite. This process slowly reduced the surface, creating a pitted texture that would later need to be smoothed away. It was less about chipping and more about pulverizing, grinding away the unwanted material particle by particle. The sound in a granite shaping yard would be different, a constant, low rhythmic thudding, almost like a giant heartbeat. The dust would be incredibly fine, a crystalline powder that coated everything. The work was slow, agonizingly so. To remove a cubic meter of granite might take weeks, even months, of continuous labor. This is where the patience of the ancient Egyptians truly shines through. They weren't in a hurry. They were building for eternity. And eternity, as it turns out, takes a very, very long time. As the basic form began to emerge, whether it was a pyramidion, the capstone of a pyramid, a column drum, or the rough outline of a statue, more refined techniques would be brought into play. For smoothing surfaces, particularly on limestone and sandstone, they would use abrasive rubbing stones. These were often irregular pieces of harder stone, used with water and sand, that ubiquitous quartz grit to slowly grind down the pecking marks and chisel scars. You can almost hear the gritty scrape, a constant, low rasping sound as the surfaces slowly transformed from rough to relatively smooth. This wasn't about making it look pretty yet. It was about preparing the surface for finer detail or for final assembly for statues. The process was one of progressive reduction. Imagine a massive rectangular block. The sculptor would first draw the outlines of the figure onto the stone, perhaps on all four sides, relying on grids and established proportions. Then the roughing out would begin, removing the largest chunks of stone from around the figure. You'd see the rough shape of limbs, the torso, the head beginning to separate from the undifferentiated mass. It's like seeing a figure slowly emerge from a fog, a quirky tidbit often overlooked. Ancient Egyptian sculptors rarely worked freehand, especially on monumental pieces. They adhered to a strict canon of proportions, using grid lines drawn directly onto the stone. Imagine a giant piece of graph paper superimposed on the block. Every part of the body, from the hairline to the knee, would correspond to a specific number of squares. This ensured consistency across different workshops and artists, and maintained the idealized, unchanging aesthetic that defined Egyptian art. So, while the initial blows were forceful, they were guided by a precise, almost mathematical framework. This meant that while you were removing vast amounts of stone, you were doing so within very strict, predefined boundaries. This stage of rough shaping was absolutely critical. Any major mistake here could ruin an entire block, potentially wasting months or even years of labor. A deep crack, an unintended fracture, or removing too much material in the wrong place could render the block unusable. Imagine the pressure on these workers, knowing the immense effort that went into quarrying and transporting the stone, and the potential wrath of an overseer, or worse, the pharaoh, if a mistake occurred. This likely fostered a culture of extreme caution and methodical work. Historians still argue whether the initial shaping for statues was done primarily by the sculptors themselves, or by a separate class of highly skilled roughers who then handed the block over for finer detailing. The logistical scale suggests a division of labor, with specialists at each stage. The air around these shaping sites would have been a chaotic symphony of human effort and the sounds of stone being meticulously dismantled. The grunts of men, the sharp crack of striking chisels, the dull thud of pounders, the gritty scrape of rubbing stones, all contributing to a relentless chorus of creation. You'd feel the vibrations under your feet, a constant tremor from the ceaseless activity. The sun would bake down, reflecting off the pale surfaces, the dust swirling in the golden light. As you observe this process, you gain an immense appreciation for the sheer willpower involved. It wasn't about speed, it was about persistence. Every blow, every rub, every adjustment contributed to the slow, inevitable emergence of the final form. The material itself dictated the pace. You couldn't rush granite and limestone, while softer still demanded respect. It was a dialogue between human intention and geological resistance, played out over countless hours, days, and months. So, as the sun begins to dip low, casting long shadows across the nascent structures, remember the arduous, unglamorous work of rough shaping. It's the stage where the raw potential of the stone begins its slow, difficult journey towards becoming a masterpiece, where colossal blocks are tamed slowly but surely under the patient, repetitive blows of ancient tools and the unwavering will of human hands. You're not just watching stone being cut, you're witnessing the very birth of form from chaos, piece by dusty piece, from the chaotic symphony of rough shaping, where colossal blocks were beaten into submission. We now turn our gaze to the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian stone masonry, the Great Pyramids. You've heard the legends, seen the photos, but standing here in the shadow of these geometric giants, you truly grasp the unimaginable scale. The air around you, even today, seems to hum with the lingering echo of millions of tons of stone, meticulously cut, precisely placed. This isn't just a collection of buildings, it's an engineered mountain range, a testament to an organizational and technical prowess that continues to baffle and inspire. You feel a familiar grit under your sandals, the pervasive dust of millennia. But here, it's not just stone dust, it's the fine, ground-down residue of an impossible dream made real. Let's talk about scale first. The Great Pyramid of Khufu alone is estimated to contain around 2.3 million blocks of stone, weighing, on average, 2.5 tons each. Some of the larger granite blocks, particularly in the King's Chamber, weigh up to 80 tons. 80 tons. Imagine your average, fully loaded 18-wheeler truck. Now picture moving that with no wheels, no engines, just human muscle and ingenious leverage. It's an exercise in mental gymnastics, trying to comprehend the sheer number of individual efforts required. If every block represented a single human push, you'd need the entire population of a small modern city just to give one shove to each stone. The first and most critical aspect of pyramid construction, after the quarrying and rough shaping we've already explored, was the foundational work. Before the first block was laid, the site had to be meticulously prepared. The Giza Plateau, while relatively flat, wasn't perfectly so. You had to level a vast area, creating a bedrock platform that could support the immense weight without settling or cracking. This involved extensive earthwork and cutting into the bedrock itself, a task that required precise surveying skills. Historians still argue whether they used water channels to achieve perfect levelness by filling them and marking the waterline, or relied on astronomical observations and plumb bobs. Regardless, the precision achieved, even over such vast distances, is astounding. It's like building a skyscraper on a perfectly leveled sheet of glass. Then came the delivery of the blocks. Remember those massive sleds, lubricated, possibly with water or wet silt, pulled by hundreds of men? Imagine these lines of workers, stretching for miles, trudging across the desert, each group pulling their assigned block. The air would be filled with the grunts of exertion, the rhythmic chants of the foreman, the creak of ropes, and the constant cloud of dust. This was a logistical ballet on a monumental scale, requiring incredible coordination to ensure a steady supply of blocks reached the construction site without bottlenecking. It was a conveyor belt made of human muscle. The construction method itself revolved around ramps. While the exact configuration of these ramps is still one of the great scholarly debates, straight, spiraling, internal, or a combination, the principle remains the same, gradually raising the blocks to increasingly higher levels. Imagine an ever-growing mountain of earth, rubble, and temporary structures built around the rising pyramid. Workers would drag the sleds up these ramps, likely pulling from the front and pushing from behind, with others pouring water or oil onto the path to reduce friction. This was incredibly dangerous work. A slip, a breaking rope, a collapsing section of ramp, any mistake could send tons of stone tumbling down, with catastrophic consequences for the workers below. This is where a quirky tidbit comes in. Some archaeologists suggest that as the pyramid grew, the ramps might have become too steep, and they may have used a system of levers and counterweights to lift the final, heavier blocks onto the upper courses. It's a bit like playing a giant, very slow game of Jenga, but with deadly consequences. The precision with which these blocks were laid is truly astonishing. The exterior casing stones, particularly those of Khufu's pyramid, were made of highly polished, fine white Tura limestone. These blocks were cut with such accuracy that the joints between them are often less than a millimeter thick, incredibly tight and laid without mortar. It's a feat of craftsmanship that rivals modern concrete pouring. You can literally run your hand over the surface and barely feel the seam. How did they achieve this? It likely involved meticulous measuring, constant checking with plumb lines and straightedges, and a painstaking process of rubbing and adjusting each block until it fit perfectly. Imagine trying to jigsaw puzzle millions of pieces together, each weighing multiple tons, under a blazing sun, with only basic tools. It required an almost obsessive attention to detail. The internal chambers and passageways, often built with even harder stones like granite, presented a different set of challenges. The Grand Gallery, for example, is a marvel of corbelled masonry, with massive granite blocks leaning inwards to support the immense weight above. The king's chamber itself, built entirely of red Aswan granite, features enormous monolithic roof beams, each weighing many tons. Lifting these beams into place within a confined internal space would have been an engineering nightmare. They likely used intricate systems of levers, counterweights, and perhaps even sand-filled chambers that could be slowly emptied to lower blocks into position. Historians still puzzle over the exact mechanics of how these internal structures were assembled with such precision, high above the ground, in near darkness. Beyond the sheer physical labor and engineering, there was the human element. Who were these workers? Not slaves, as often popularly depicted. Archaeological evidence suggests they were skilled laborers, farmers, during the flood season when agricultural work was impossible, who were compensated for their work, possibly with food, beer, and shelter. They lived in purpose-built villages, near the pyramid sites, complete with bakeries, breweries, and even medical facilities. Imagine a vibrant, bustling city of thousands, dedicated solely to the construction of a single monument. It was a massive, state-sponsored public works project on an unprecedented scale, fostering national unity and religious devotion. The final touches on the pyramid would have involved the application of the outer casing stones, followed by their meticulous polishing to a brilliant sheen. As we mentioned before, the Great Pyramid would have glowed like a giant white diamond in the desert sun. This polishing involved prolonged rubbing with abrasive sands and rubbing stones, transforming the relatively rough quarry finish into a smooth, reflective surface. It was a process of turning a mountain into a jewel, a truly dazzling spectacle that is now almost entirely lost to us, as most of the casing stones were plundered for other constructions over the millennia. The Great Pyramids stand as an enduring testament not just to the power of the pharaohs, but to the collective genius and perseverance of the ancient Egyptian people. They represent the pinnacle of their stone carving and construction capabilities. It wasn't just about moving heavy objects. It was about understanding materials, mastering basic physics, organizing vast numbers of people, and maintaining an unyielding vision over decades. You gaze up at the sheer height, feeling dwarfed by the enormity of the accomplishment. It whispers of a time when human will, combined with patient, methodical effort, could literally reshape the earth. So, as the last rays of the setting sun paint the ancient stones in hues of orange and gold, reflect on the monumental effort encapsulated within these silent giants. They are not just tombs. They are encyclopedias of ancient ingenuity, colossal monuments to the lost art of working stone on a scale that defies easy comprehension. You can almost hear the ghostly chants of the workers, the scraping of stone on stone, the distant shouts of the overseers, echoing across the sands of time. From the colossal, almost brutal grandeur of pyramid construction, where sheer mass and precise fitting were paramount, we now gently pivot to a realm where stone carving takes on a more refined, narrative quality. The temple tablets, with their intricate reliefs and hieroglyphic inscriptions. Imagine yourself stepping out of the harsh glare of the pyramid plateau and into the cool, shadowed embrace of a temple hall, perhaps at Karnak or Luxor. The air here feels different, heavy with the scent of ancient incense, a stillness that carries the whispers of forgotten rituals. You run your hand over a wall, not just a flat surface, but a tapestry woven from stone, alive with images and stories. Unlike the massive, often unadorned blocks of the pyramids, temple walls, columns, and pylons were the canvas for the ancient Egyptian worldview. Here, stone ceased to be merely structural. It became a medium for propaganda, prayer, and historical record. The art of relief carving, which involves cutting away the background to leave the figures raised bas-relief, or lowering the figures themselves below the surface sunk relief, was meticulously perfected. You're not just looking at a carving. You're looking at a carefully composed scene, a freeze frame of divine interaction or pharaonic triumph. Let's first consider the two main types of relief, bas-relief and sunk relief. Bas-relief, or low relief, is what most people picture when they think of carved murals. The figures project slightly from the background, creating a subtle three-dimensional effect. This was common in earlier periods and for interior scenes where light might play gently across the surfaces. Imagine the painstaking process. The artist would first draw the scene onto the carefully smoothed stone wall. Then the carvers would begin to chip away at the stone around the outlines of the figures, gradually lowering the background until the figure stood out in subtle relief. This required immense precision, ensuring that the depth was consistent and the contours clean. It's like sculpting, but in 2 dimensions, carefully peeling away layers of stone to reveal the image beneath. Sunk relief, on the other hand, is arguably more uniquely Egyptian and became increasingly popular in later periods, especially for exterior walls. Here, the outlines of the figures are deeply incised into the stone, and the surface within the outline is carved away, leaving the background at its original level. The figures are thus recessed into the wall. This technique offered several advantages. Firstly, it preserved the integrity of the wall's surface, making it stronger and less prone to erosion, a pragmatic concern for outdoor monuments exposed to the harsh sun and occasional sandstorms. Secondly, in the strong Egyptian sunlight, sunk relief creates dramatic shadows within the carved lines, making the figures appear sharply defined and almost pop out from the wall, even from a distance. It's an optical illusion built into the very fabric of the stone. Imagine the carver working on a sunk relief. Instead of carving away the entire background, they are carefully outlining and then carving into the figure itself, creating a hollow shape. This requires an even greater degree of control, as a slip could easily damage the pristine outer surface of the wall. Copper chisels, finer points, and abrasive tools would be used, much like in shaping larger blocks, but with a jeweler's precision. The smallest details, from the intricate patterns on a pharaoh's crown to the individual feathers of a god's headdress, would be rendered with astonishing fidelity. This isn't just craftsmanship, it's artistry on a grand scale, multiplied by thousands of square meters of wall space. Then there are the hieroglyphs. These weren't just decorative, they were the sacred language, the voice of the gods and the pharaohs, etched into eternity. Every temple wall, every statue base, every tomb, chamber was typically covered in these beautiful pictorial symbols. Carving hieroglyphs required a different kind of skill, the ability to reproduce precise, intricate forms, often quite small, with consistent depth and clarity. Think of it as ancient font design, painstakingly rendered by hand in stone. Some hieroglyphs might be exquisitely detailed depictions of birds or animals, while others were simple geometric shapes, each requiring a specific technique. A mainstream historical fact here is that the Rosetta Stone, which famously provided the key to deciphering hieroglyphs, was itself a form of stone tablet, bearing inscriptions in 3 scripts. The process for both reliefs and hieroglyphs would typically begin with master, draftsmen, and scribes. They would draw the entire scene or text onto the smoothed stone surface, often using a red pigment for the initial sketch, and then correcting with black. You can sometimes still see these original red guidelines peeking through on unfinished sections of temple walls. This was the blueprint, the non-negotiable guide for the carvers. It allowed for meticulous planning and ensured that the intricate compositions, often spanning vast areas, were perfectly balanced and aesthetically pleasing. A quirky tidbit: Some carvings show evidence of initial drawings being changed during the carving process, indicating a degree of artistic flexibility or corrections being made on the fly, perhaps due to a mistake or a change in the patron's wishes. Once the drawing was approved, the carvers would move in. They would use a variety of specialized tools, fine copper chisels for outlining and defining forms, smaller points for delicate details, and abrasive tools for smoothing and polishing. For areas requiring very fine detail or sharp angles, they might have employed harder stone tools, like flakes of flint or obsidian, for precision cutting. The goal was to create a clean, crisp line, a sharp edge that would define the figure or hieroglyph against its background. Imagine the quiet, focused intensity of the work, the rhythmic tap-tap, the occasional scrape of an abrasive stone, the constant need to brush away dust, to step back and check the line, to ensure consistency across a team of carvers working on the same scene. This wasn't a job for the impatient. It required extreme focus, steady hands, and an eye for minute detail. The sheer volume of carved text and imagery is staggering. Entire temple complexes, covering acres, are adorned from floor to ceiling with these intricate narratives. Consider the hypostyle hall at Karnak, with its forest of colossal columns, each covered in deeply carved sunk reliefs and hieroglyphs. Every column, every wall, tells a story of pharaohs battling enemies, offering to gods, or performing sacred rituals. It was a visual encyclopedia, a sacred comic book, writ large in stone. Historians still argue whether the carvers themselves were literate. While the master scribes drew the texts, the physical act of carving required a deep understanding of the forms and their aesthetic qualities, even if not their full linguistic meaning. It's likely that a specialized class of sculptor scribes existed, individuals who bridged the gap between artistic execution and textual accuracy. The uniformity of carved hieroglyphs across different sites suggests a standardized training and strict adherence to established forms. The completion of the carving was rarely the final step. Most, if not all, of these reliefs and hieroglyphs were originally painted in vibrant colors. Imagine the stark white and red of the carved stone suddenly bursting with blues, greens, yellows, and reds, bringing the scenes to vivid life. This added another layer of artistic complexity and visual impact, transforming the monochromatic stone into a riot of color. We'll delve into the pigments and painting process later, but it's crucial to remember that what we see today faded. Stone is often only a ghost of their original splendor. So, as you slowly trace the outline of a carved figure with your fingers, feeling the cool, smooth stone, remember the hands that painstakingly shaped it. Remember the master draftsman. Initial sketch, the carver's patient chisel, the steady hand that incised each hieroglyph. These temple tablets and their intricate inscriptions are not merely ancient art. They are the living voice of a civilization etched into stone for eternity, speaking silently across the millennia. They are a profound testament to the ancient Egyptian belief that by rendering something in stone, you imbued it with a permanent, enduring reality. You can almost hear the soft, rhythmic tapping of the chisels, whispering stories of gods and kings. Asterisk. Having immersed ourselves in the intricate narratives etched onto temple walls, We now turn our attention to the ultimate expression of ancient Egyptian stone carving, the freestanding statue. This is where the inert block truly transcends its material form, becoming a living presence, a tangible representation of a god, a pharaoh, or a revered individual. You're no longer just looking at a decorated surface. You're standing before a silent, eternal being, carved with a sense of dignity and timelessness that still resonates across millennia. Imagine walking into a vast temple courtyard, perhaps at Abu Simbel, and suddenly you are dwarfed by the colossal seated figures of Ramesses II. The sheer scale, the imposing stillness, the feeling of an ancient gaze upon you. It's an experience that transcends mere observation. The transformation of a raw stone block into a finished statue was arguably the most demanding and sophisticated application of ancient Egyptian stone carving techniques. It combined the brute force of quarrying and rough shaping with the delicate precision of relief carving, all while navigating the complexities of three-dimensional form. This wasn't just about cutting away excess. It was about revealing a hidden soul within the stone. The process began, as always, with the selection of the perfect block. For important statues, especially those of gods or pharaohs, the stone had to be impeccable, flawless, free of internal cracks or impurities that could compromise the finished piece. Harder stones, like granite, diorite, and basalt, were often preferred for their durability and the luminous polish they could achieve, ensuring the statue's longevity. Imagine the quarry masters, with their discerning eyes, seeking out a block worthy of embodying divine power. Once the colossal block arrived at the workshop, the sculptor's journey began. Unlike modern sculptors who might work organically, ancient Egyptian sculptors adhered to a rigorous, almost mathematical system. A mainstream historical fact here is the use of grids. The master draftsman would draw a precise grid of squares onto the faces of the roughly shaped block. This grid, based on the established canon of proportions, dictated every aspect of the figure: the height of the head, the length of the limbs, the width of the shoulders. Each part of the body corresponded to a specific number of squares, ensuring a consistent, idealized form regardless of the individual sculptor. This allowed for a remarkable uniformity in Egyptian art over thousands of years, a stylistic continuity that is almost unique in art history. It's like building a figure with Lego blocks, but the blocks are invisible and made of stone, with the grid as their guide. The carvers would then begin the arduous process of blocking out the figure. This involved removing large amounts of stone to reveal the general contours of the body. Imagine the block as a giant cube, and the carvers slowly slicing away the corners and edges to find the human form within. For the hardest stones, this would involve repeated pounding with dolerite hammers, slowly bruising away the unwanted material. For softer stones, broad copper chisels and mallets would be used, chipping away at the mass. The goal at this stage was to create the four basic views of the statue: front, back, and two sides, in a two-dimensional relief before merging them into a fully three-dimensional form. You'd see the profile of the nose emerge on one side and the broad shoulders. On the front, still very much contained within the original block. This phase of roughing out was particularly risky. Any miscalculation, any blow that went too deep, could ruin the entire statue. Imagine the tension, the the sheer focus required, as tons of irreplaceable stone were slowly brought to life. A sculptor's nightmare, surely, to come across an unforeseen flaw or to slip with a heavy hammer. This is where a quirky tidbit comes in. Some unfinished statues show evidence of patching. If a small piece chipped off or a flaw was found, they might meticulously carve a perfectly fitting plug of stone and bond it into place, hoping the paint and polish would disguise the repair. It's a testament to their resourcefulness and the value placed on these massive undertakings. As the rough form took shape, finer tools came into play. Smaller, more precise copper chisels, various points, and abrasive tools made from harder stones would be used to define the details. The subtle curve of a lip, the almond shape of an eye, the musculature of a limb, for truly intricate work, such as the carving of fingernails, individual strands of hair, or delicate jewelry. The sculptors would need incredibly fine points and a steady hand. The process was one of continuous refinement, moving from broad strokes to minute details, always working progressively deeper into the stone. The challenge of carving a statue, especially a colossal one, was exacerbated by the stone's inherent resistance. You couldn't simply model it like clay. You had to chip, abrade, and grind away. This meant working subtractively, with no room for adding material back. Every cut was permanent. This fostered an artistic style that emphasized solidity, frontality, and a contained block-like form, which perfectly suited the enduring, eternal nature they sought to convey. The statue often remained partially attached to the back slab, providing structural support and emphasizing its connection to the earth. A characteristic feature of much Egyptian statuary, the faces of the statues were perhaps the most critical element. They had to convey the idealized features of the pharaoh or god, a serene and timeless expression that projected authority and divinity. This required master sculptors, individuals with exceptional skill and an intimate understanding of the artistic conventions. They would use the finest abrasive tools to achieve the incredible smoothness and subtle contours of the face, a level of polish that could make the stone almost seem to breathe. Once the carving was complete, the statue entered the final, painstaking stage: polishing. This was not a quick buff. It was a prolonged, labor-intensive process that could take months or even years for colossal figures. Using progressively finer abrasive sands, sometimes mixed with water, and rubbing with handheld stones, leather, or cloth pads, workers would systematically grind and polish every square inch of the statue's surface. For hard stones, like diorite and granite, this process would have been incredibly arduous, turning the dull, pitted surface into a lustrous, almost reflective finish. The black diorite statue of Kafir, with its astonishingly smooth, dark surface, is a prime example of this ultimate polishing skill. A surface so refined it almost seems alive. Historians still argue whether they achieved some of this polish through the use of powdered gemstones or just incredibly fine, pure quartz sand and endless rubbing. The results, regardless of the exact abrasive, are undeniable. The goal of this intensive polishing was not just aesthetic, it was also practical. A smooth, sealed surface would be less prone to erosion from wind and sand, helping to preserve the statue for eternity. Furthermore, many statues were originally painted, and a smooth surface provided an ideal canvas for the pigments. which would have brought the figures to vibrant life, adding a layer of realism to their otherwise idealized forms. Consider the dedication involved. Thousands of man-hours, spanning perhaps years or even decades for the most colossal projects, were poured into a single statue. It was a multi-generational endeavor, a continuous transfer of skill and effort. The individual sculptor might not even live to see their masterpiece completed, but they worked as part of a collective, contributing to a legacy that stretched far beyond their own lives. You stand there, gazing up at the impassive face of a granite pharaoh, feeling the coolness radiating from the stone. It's more than just rock. It's a vessel for belief, a conduit to the divine, a tangible link between the human and the eternal. The transformation from an inert block to this imposing presence is a powerful reminder of the human capacity for vision, perseverance, and astonishing craftsmanship, all coaxed from the silent, patient embrace of the Earth's most stubborn materials. You can almost feel the presence radiating from the statue, a quiet, profound energy imbued by the hands that shaped it. From the monumental, silent grandeur of the colossal statues, we now peel back another layer of the ancient Egyptian world, stepping away from the public spectacle and into the more intimate, yet equally dedicated, environment of the sculptor's studio. You are no longer merely an observer. You are a quiet, dusty presence in a bustling workshop, feeling the grit of stone dust underfoot, hearing the constant chorus of taps, scrapes, and whispered instructions. The air is warm, perhaps, heavy with the scent of human effort and the faint taps of damp stone. This is where the magic, the painstaking alchemy of transforming raw material into revered art truly happened. A place of apprentices, journeymen, and master craftsmen, all bound by the shared purpose of coaxing form from stubborn rock. Imagine stepping into such a studio, perhaps located near a temple complex or royal tomb. It's not a pristine, brightly lit gallery. It's a practical, often open-air space, perhaps under a simple awning to offer some respite from the relentless sun. Scattered around are blocks of stone in various stages of completion, some still rough from the quarry, others with initial grid lines faintly visible, and still more revealing the emerging contours of a figure or a relief. The ground is uneven, littered with chips of stone-worn tools, and perhaps a few half-eaten dates. The journey to becoming a master stone carver in ancient Egypt was a long and arduous one, starting in childhood. Boys, sometimes as young as 10 or 12, would begin their apprenticeship. This wasn't a formal schooling in the modern sense, but a hands-on, learn-by-doing process. You, as an apprentice, would start at the very bottom of the hierarchy, perhaps fetching water for the workers, sweeping away stone dust, or sharpening tools. It sounds mundane, but even these tasks offered invaluable exposure. You'd observe the masters, silently absorbing their techniques, their rhythms, the way they held a chisel, the precision of their mallet. It was a rigorous, practical education, where every task, however small, contributed to the final product and instilled discipline. As you progressed, you would move on to more direct involvement with the stone. Your first carving tasks might involve working on practice pieces, perhaps simple blocks with lines to be cut, or roughing out very basic shapes. You'd learn the feel of different stones under the chisel, the way limestone chipped differently from sandstone, the subtle resistance of granite, even to a heavy pounder. This early stage was about developing muscle memory, hand-eye coordination, and a deep, intuitive understanding of the material. Imagine spending months, even years, just learning how to strike a chisel consistently and accurately, or how to rub a surface smooth without creating dips or ridges. It was a testament to patience and probably a source of immense frustration. The tools themselves were a constant presence. Apprentices would be responsible for maintaining the copper chisels, grinding them sharp on whetstones, or for tending the supply of dolerite pounders, ensuring they were chipped to the right size and shape. You'd also learn about the various abrasives, the different grades of sand, the properties of emery, and how to mix them with water to create the perfect grinding paste. A quirky tidbit is that some textual evidence suggests ancient Egyptian workshops might have had specific individuals, perhaps older apprentices or lower-ranked craftsmen, whose primary job was solely to sharpen tools. Imagine a lifetime dedicated to ensuring everyone else's chisels were sharp. A vital, yet utterly unsung hero of the ancient world. As an apprentice gained skill, they would move up the hierarchy, becoming a journeyman. At this stage, you'd be entrusted with larger, more complex sections of a project, always under the watchful eye of a master. You might work on the less critical areas of a relief, or perhaps on the roughing out of a statue's limbs or torso. This was where your understanding of the artistic canon, the strict rules of proportion and representation, would deepen. You'd learn how to transfer the master draftsman's two-dimensional sketch onto a three-dimensional stone, how to maintain the precise grid lines as you carved, ensuring the finished piece adhered perfectly to the established norms. This adherence to artistic convention, a mainstream historical fact, meant that individual artistic expression was often sublimated to the collective, timeless style of Egyptian art. The pinnacle of this profession was the master sculptor. These were not just skilled craftsmen. They were often highly respected figures, sometimes even holding priestly titles or administrative positions. They were the designers, the overseers, the ones who could envision the finished piece within the raw block. The master would draw the initial designs, supervise the roughing out, and then personally undertake the most critical and delicate stages of the carving, the faces of statues, the intricate details of royal regalia, the most complex hieroglyphic cartouches. Their hands were the ones that truly brought the stone to life, imbuing it with the desired expression and symbolic power. Historians still argue whether there were distinct guilds or formalized schools for these craftsmen, or if it was purely a master-apprentice system. The consistency of style over millennia suggests a highly structured and effective method of knowledge transfer. The atmosphere in a sculptor's studio would have been a blend of intense concentration and communal effort. While individual carvers worked on their sections, there would be a constant hum of activity, the tapped, tapped, tap of chisels, the scraping of abrasives, the hushed instructions from overseers, the occasional grunt of effort, and perhaps the faint, rhythmic chanting of workers as they moved heavy stones. It was a place of mentorship, of shared knowledge, and of a deep, almost spiritual connection to the material. You'd see older, experienced hands guiding younger ones, sharing tricks of the trade, demonstrating how to achieve a particular curve or a flawless polish. Life as a stone carver was undoubtedly tough. It was physically demanding, often performed in harsh conditions. The constant dust would have been a significant health hazard, leading to lung diseases. Accidents, from falling blocks to errant chisel blows, were likely common, yet there was also immense pride in the work. These craftsmen were not just building monuments, they were participating in acts of creation that brought honor to the gods and ensured the immortality of the pharaohs. Their skill was vital to the very fabric of Egyptian society and belief. The remnants of these workshops, sometimes found adjacent to tombs or temples, offer fascinating glimpses into their daily lives. You might find discarded tools, broken practice pieces, unfinished statues that reveal the stages of carving, and even artists' palettes with traces of pigment. These silent archaeological clues allow us to reconstruct, however imperfectly, the painstaking process and the community that sustained this ancient art form. You can almost see the ghosts of these carvers, their hands still moving, tirelessly shaping stone for eternity. So, as the daylight fades and the sounds of the bustling workshop begin to quiet, take a moment to appreciate the journey of the ancient Egyptian sculptor. From the curious apprentice to the revered master, each step was a testament to dedication, skill, and an unwavering commitment to a craft that shaped a civilization. These hands, these minds, these countless hours of meticulous labor are all embodied in the silent, enduring stone figures that continue to gaze across the sands of time. You can almost feel the calluses on their hands, the ache in their muscles, and the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly placed chisel mark, asterisk. Having witnessed the arduous apprenticeship and daily toil within the sculptor's studio, we now turn our attention to the intellectual framework that guided every chisel stroke, the divine proportions, and the strict artistic canons of ancient Egypt. You're no longer just observing the physical act of carving. You're peering into the very mind of the ancient Egyptian artist, understanding the invisible rules that shaped every visible form. Imagine standing before a magnificent statue, perhaps the iconic seated kafir, and seeing not just a figure, but a meticulously constructed geometric puzzle, a physical manifestation of an underlying sacred order. The air around you feels almost mathematical, filled with the echo of ancient measurements and precise ratios. Unlike many other artistic traditions, ancient Egyptian art, particularly sculpture, was not primarily concerned with naturalistic representation or individual expression. Its purpose was fundamentally religious and symbolic, to ensure cosmic order met, and to provide enduring vessels for the Ka life force of the deceased or the gods. To achieve this, a highly formalized system of representation, known as the artistic canon, was developed and rigorously maintained for over 3 millennia. This is a mainstream historical fact, perhaps one of the most defining characteristics of Egyptian art. It's why, when you see an Egyptian statue, whether from the Old Kingdom or the New Kingdom, there's an immediate, unmistakable, stylistic consistency, a timeless quality that transcends individual periods. At the heart of this canon was the grid system. We touched upon it briefly in the sculptor's studio, but let's delve deeper. Imagine the sculptor's block, smoothed and prepared. Before any significant carving began, a grid of squares would be drawn directly onto the stone's surface. Typically, in red pigment, these squares weren't arbitrary. They were precise units of measurement, usually corresponding to a specific body part. For instance, a standing figure might be 18 squares tall, from the soles of the feet to the hairline, with specific points like the knee, elbow, and navel falling on designated grid lines. This system ensured that every figure, regardless of size, conformed to the same ideal proportions. It's like having a universal template for all human and divine forms, ensuring consistency even if multiple artists worked on the same colossal piece over decades. This grid wasn't just a guide for proportion, it also dictated pose and composition. Figures were typically shown in either a strict frontal pose for standing, or seated statues, or a composite profile for reliefs. In the composite profile, the head is in profile, the eye is shown frontally, the torso is frontal, and the legs and feet are in profile, while anatomically impossible. This convention allowed the Egyptians to present the most characteristic and recognizable aspects of the body simultaneously, ensuring clarity and legibility. It's a pragmatic, artistic choice designed to convey information rather than capture fleeting reality. Imagine trying to explain to an ancient Egyptian why you'd ever draw someone from a single, less informative angle. They'd probably just look at you funny. The strict adherence to these proportions had several implications. Firstly, it meant that the individual identity of the artist was largely subsumed by the collective style. While there were certainly master sculptors with exceptional skill, their role was to perfectly execute the canon, not to innovate stylistically in a way that would be recognizable as their personal touch. This stands in stark contrast to many later Western art traditions, where individual genius is prized. For the Egyptians, the continuity of the artistic tradition was far more important than fleeting personal expression. Secondly, it contributed to the serene, unchanging quality of Egyptian art. Figures often appear stoic, immobile, and timeless. This wasn't a lack of skill in rendering emotion or movement. It was a deliberate artistic choice reflecting their belief in an eternal, unchanging cosmic order. The statues were not meant to depict momentary actions or fleeting emotions. They were meant to embody enduring states of being. A quirky tidbit, most notably during the Amarna period under Akhenaten, where art became much more naturalistic and expressive, almost jarringly so, compared to the preceding and succeeding eras. But this was a fleeting experiment, and the traditional canon quickly reasserted itself. The divine proportions themselves were believed to reflect an underlying cosmic harmony, a perfect order decreed by the gods. By adhering to these ratios, the artists were not just creating art, they were participating in the maintenance of Mat, the universal balance and order. Thus, every line, every angle, every dimension was imbued with symbolic meaning and religious significance. The act of carving became a sacred ritual in itself, aligning human effort with divine principles. Consider how this affected the day-to-day work in the studio. An apprentice wouldn't just be told to carve a leg. They would be taught that a leg must be X squares long, with the knee falling at Y point and the calf muscle occupying Z amount of space on the grid. Every stroke of the chisel was a precise, calculated action, informed by generations of accumulated knowledge and guided by the grid. This methodical approach likely reduced errors and ensured a consistent output, even with large teams of workers. The tools, too, played played a role in maintaining these proportions. While simple, they allowed for remarkably precise measurements. Plumb bobs ensured vertical accuracy, while straight tedges and set squares ensured horizontal and angular precision. The simple string, when stretched taut and used against the grid, became a powerful measuring device, allowing sculptors to transfer measurements from a small model to a colossal block. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians employed advanced geometry or merely relied on empirical rules of thumb to achieve the almost perfect symmetry and alignment seen in their largest structures and most complex carvings, given the results. A sophisticated understanding of practical geometry, even if not expressed in theoretical terms, seems undeniable. The final surface treatment, especially the meticulous polishing of hard stone statues, further emphasized this sense of timeless perfection. A highly polished surface reflects light, giving the statue a luminous quality, almost as if it is imbued with an inner glow. This wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about creating a sense of awe, making the statue appear as eternal and unblemished as the gods it represented. The smoothness removed any trace of the carving process, making the figure appear as if it had simply emerged from the earth fully formed, a gift from the divine. So, when you stand before an ancient Egyptian statue, try to look beyond the immediate visual impact and perceive the underlying order. See the invisible grid, the strict adherence to proportion, the deliberate choices in pose and composition. Understand that this art was not about capturing fleeting reality, but about embodying enduring truth. It was a language of symbols, meticulously rendered in stone, designed to communicate profound religious and ideological messages across generations. Every curve, every angle, every line was a deliberate choice, steeped in millennia of tradition and guided by a sacred aesthetic. You can almost feel the quiet hum of mathematical precision embedded within the very atoms of the stone, a silent echo of ancient wisdom. Having delved into the rigorous framework of divine proportions and artistic canons that dictated form, we now add another vibrant layer to our understanding of ancient Egyptian stone art: the application of color. You've been picturing statues and reliefs as stark, monochromatic stone, perhaps imagining the subtle nuances of granite or the creamy hues of limestone. But now, imagine those same surfaces, meticulously carved, suddenly bursting forth in a riot of blues, greens, reds, and golds. The air around you, no longer just dusty, feels infused with the ghost of ancient pigments, the silent hum of brushes, and the subtle scent of mineral binders. This is where the enduring stone truly came alive, not just through form, but through a palette of colors that spoke directly to the ancient Egyptian soul. It's a mainstream historical fact that almost all ancient Egyptian sculptures, reliefs, and even architectural elements were originally painted. What we see today, though, weathered, unadorned stone, is largely the result of millennia of exposure to sun, wind, and the occasional sandstorm, which have stripped away the vibrant layers of pigment. Imagine walking into a newly finished temple in ancient Egypt. It wouldn't have been the dignified, somber gray we perceive today, but a dazzling, almost overwhelming spectacle of color, each hue laden with symbolic meaning. It would have been less like a museum exhibit and more like an immersive, technicolored journey. The process of painting began only after the stone carving was complete, and the surface meticulously smoothed. For reliefs, this meant the background had been removed, bas-relief, or the figures recessed, sunk relief, and the hieroglyphs precisely incised. For statues, the final polishing stage would have been completed, ensuring a flawless surface for the application of paint. The preparation of the surface was crucial. Imperfections could mar the final colored effect. Sometimes a thin layer of plaster or gesso, a mixture of plaster and glue, was applied to the stone surface first, especially if the stone itself was less than perfect or had slight inconsistencies. This provided a uniform, smooth ground for the pigments to adhere to. The pigments themselves were almost entirely derived from natural mineral sources, a testament to the Egyptians' deep understanding of their natural environment. This is where a quirky tidbit about their resourcefulness comes in. They basically just ground up interesting rocks and minerals they found lying around. White, derived from gypsum calcium sulfate or calcite, calcium carbonate, both commonly found minerals. Black, sourced from soot, carbon black, often collected from lamps, or from finely ground pyrolusite, manganese, or red. A rich, earthy red came from red ochre iron oxide, a ubiquitous pigment found in many parts of Egypt. Yellow ochre hydrated iron oxide provided various shades of yellow. Another easily accessible mineral, blue. This was perhaps the most distinctive and technologically advanced pigment, Egyptian blue. It was a synthetic pigment, one of the first in history, created by heating a mixture of silica, copper, calcium carbonate, and an alkali like natron or plant ash to extremely high temperatures, around 800–1000 degrees Celsius. The result was a stunning, stable blue that mimicked the precious lapis lazuli. The invention of Egyptian blue demonstrates a sophisticated knowledge of chemistry and pyrotechnology. Green, often produced by mixing yellow ochre with Egyptian blue, or by using ground malachite, copper carbonate, a naturally occurring green mineral. These raw pigments were then ground into fine powders, a laborious task typically done in mortar, using pestles. Once powdered, they were mixed with a binding agent to create a workable paint. The exact nature of these binders is still a subject of scholarly debate, but common theories include plant gums, like gum arabic, animal glue from hides or bones, or even egg white. Water was then added to achieve the desired consistency, creating a paint that was durable yet allowed for smooth application. Imagine the studio, filled not just with the sounds of chiseling, but also the rhythmic grinding of pigments and the quiet swish of brushes. The application of paint was meticulous. Outlines of figures and hieroglyphs would often be reinforced with a fine black line, giving them crisp definition. Then, areas would be filled in with solid blocks of color, shading, perspective, and subtle blending, as seen in later European art were largely absent from traditional Egyptian painting, which favored a clear, distinct, and symbolic use of color. Each color carried specific connotations: blue for water, sky, and divinity, green for fertility and rebirth, red for life, power, and often chaos, yellow for the sun and eternity. The choice of color was not arbitrary, but deeply symbolic, reinforcing the message of the carving. For example, a god's skin might be painted gold to emphasize their divine nature, while a pharaoh might have reddish-brown skin for men and lighter yellow ochre skin for women. reflecting idealized conventions rather than strict realism. Hieroglyphs, too, were often brightly colored, making the texts not only legible but visually striking. This meant that the painted surface was just as important as the carved form in conveying the full meaning of the artwork. The painting was often done by specialized artists, separate from the primary carvers, although some master sculptors might have overseen the entire process. These painters had to be incredibly precise, working within the carved outlines, ensuring no color bled where it shouldn't. Imagine painting hundreds of meters of temple wall or countless individual hieroglyphs, maintaining consistent color and crisp edges. It required a steady hand and an almost meditative focus. One of the challenges for modern archaeologists is that while the stone structures themselves endure, the vibrant paint layers are often the first to disappear due to exposure. However, in protected environments, like sealed tombs or deeply buried sections of temples, the colors have miraculously survived, offering breathtaking glimpses into the original splendor of Egyptian art. When you see the vibrant painted reliefs in the tomb of Nefertari, for instance, you're not just looking at a historical artifact. You're experiencing a direct visual connection to the ancient world as it was meant to be seen. Historians still argue whether the polishing of hard stones like granite was sometimes done after a thin layer of pigment was applied, allowing the color to seep into the pores of the stone and become more durable, or if paint was always applied as a surface layer. The evidence is complex and likely varied depending on the stone and the desired effect. What is clear is that the Egyptians understood the interplay between texture, form, and color, using all three to create a cohesive and powerful artistic statement. So, as you mentally repaint the silent stone of ancient Egypt, imagine the dazzling blues of the heavens, the fertile greens of the Nile, the fiery reds of the desert sun, and the shimmering golds of divine skin. The stone, meticulously carved, then burst into life through these vibrant hues, transforming static forms into dynamic narratives. This fusion of durable stone and luminous color created an art that was not only aesthetically profound, but deeply meaningful, a constant visual sermon on the cosmic order and the power of the gods and pharaohs. You can almost feel the presence of those long-lost colors shimmering on the ancient surfaces, bringing the past vividly to life. Asterisk. Having marveled at the vibrant hues that once brought life to carved stone, we now confront a different, perhaps more poignant, aspect of ancient Egyptian stone carving: the unfinished legacy. You've seen the perfectly rendered statues, the impeccably joined pyramid blocks, the meticulously painted reliefs. But what about the pieces that didn't make it? The half-carved obelisks still embedded in the quarry, the statues with missing limbs or unpolished faces, the temple walls where the outlines of figures remain unchiseled. These incomplete masterpieces are not failures. They are invaluable glimpses into the very process of creation, frozen moments in time that reveal the challenges, the techniques, and sometimes the sheer human drama behind the finished works. You stand amidst these silent, aborted dreams, feeling the weight of effort that never reached its intended conclusion. The air here holds the quiet echo of abandoned tools and unfulfilled promises. Imagine visiting the ancient granite quarry at Aswan, not just looking at the finished obelisk, but walking into the very heart of the bedrock where the unfinished obelisk lies. This gargantuan piece of stone, if completed, would have been the largest ever carved, towering over 40 meters and weighing well over 1,000 tons. But it lies there, still partially attached to the bedrock, its top surface marked with the characteristic pitting of the dolerite pounders, its sides roughly shaped. This is a mainstream historical fact, a pilgrimage site for anyone seeking to understand the scale of ancient Egyptian ambition and the methods they employed. The story of the unfinished obelisk is a stark reminder of the challenges inherent in stone carving. It wasn't abandoned due to a lack of effort or skill, but likely because a massive crack developed in the granite during the extraction process. Imagine the despair of the quarry master and his hundreds of workers, having toiled for years, perhaps even decades, to free this colossal monolith, only to discover a fatal flaw that rendered it unusable. It's a cruel twist of fate, a reminder that even with all their ingenuity and perseverance, they were still, ultimately, at the mercy of nature's imperfections. This provides a rare, tangible insight into the risks involved in working with such immense natural materials. Unfinished pieces like this are an archaeologist's dream, a silent classroom. They provide direct evidence of the working methods. You can see the initial channels cut around the block, the marks of the pounders, the gradual progression of the shaping. In the case of the unfinished obelisk, the sheer depth of the cut required to free it from the bedrock reveals the immense physical effort involved in severing such a massive piece of granite. You can almost hear the rhythmic thudding of the stone hammers echoing through the quarry, a constant testament to the relentless human labor beyond the quarries. Unfinished statues are also found in workshops and temple sites. These might range from colossal figures with only their basic form blocked out, to smaller pieces with fine details complete on one side but left rough on the other. A quirky tidbit: some statues were deliberately left unfinished in certain areas, such as the back pillars or the spaces between limbs, to maintain the structural integrity of the stone, indicating a pragmatic balance between artistic ideal and material reality. These seemingly incomplete features were actually design choices to prevent breakage. Why were these pieces abandoned? The reasons are varied and tell their own stories. Flaws in the stone, as with the unfinished obelisk, an unseen crack or inclusion within the stone could render it unusable, even after significant effort. Imagine the heartbreak of finding such a flaw after months of work. Death of the patron pharaoh. Many monumental projects were commissioned by a specific pharaoh to commemorate their reign or for their funerary cult. If the pharaoh died unexpectedly, the project might be immediately halted and the unfinished pieces abandoned, as the new pharaoh would typically want to begin their own projects. This is a mainstream historical fact that explains many abrupt stops in construction. You can almost feel the collective sigh of 1,000 workers as they are told to down tools on a project that might have consumed years of their lives. Change in plans or materials. A pharaoh might decide to change the design of a temple or shift to a different type of stone, leaving previous efforts incomplete. Economic shifts or political instability could also lead to projects being put on hold indefinitely. Accidents. Large-scale stonework was inherently dangerous. A block might slip during transport, damaging it beyond repair, or a piece might chip off during carving, creating an irreparable flaw. Requisition for other projects. Occasionally, a partially carved block might have been repurposed for a different, less ambitious project if it could be modified. This shows their practical approach to materials, even if it meant sacrificing a grand vision. These unfinished works are not just mute witnesses to ancient methods. They are also a window into the human element of the craft. They reveal the sheer volume of labor required for each piece, the iterative nature of the carving process from rough to refined, and the organizational challenges of managing such massive undertakings. You can see the marks of different tools at different stages, the deep bruising of the pounders, the cleaner cuts of copper chisels, the initial grid lines still visible beneath the rough forms. For scholars, these unfinished pieces are invaluable. They offer clues to sequencing of work by observing the stages of completion on a single piece. Archaeologists can deduce the precise order in which different carving techniques were applied. Tool marks. The distinct marks left by various tools, pounders, chisels, abrasives, can be studied to understand their specific uses and the force applied. Labor organization. The scale of unfinished projects suggests the vast number of workers involved and the highly organized management system required. Artistic process. The visible guidelines, corrections, and uncarved sections illuminate the strict adherence to canonical proportions and the meticulous planning involved. Historians still argue whether some of these abandoned pieces were simply surplus, stored for future use but never called upon or truly given up on. The sheer number of such finds suggests a high rate of both intentional and unintentional abandonment. You walk past a partially carved sphinx, its face still a rough block, its paws just beginning to emerge from the stone. It sits there, eternally waiting for the chisel that will never come, a silent monument to unfulfilled potential. It's a powerful reminder that even in a civilization renowned for its meticulousness and permanence, imperfections and interruptions were an inevitable part of the creative journey. These uncompleted giants and forgotten fragments are not mere debris. They are integral to the story of how the ancient Egyptians coaxed wonders from the earth. They speak of the fleeting nature of human ambition against the backdrop of geological time, a poignant whisper from the past. Having explored the silent stories told by unfinished projects, we now shift our focus from the monumental to the intensely human, delving into the daily lives and harsh realities of the workers who toiled at the quarry face. You are no longer merely an observer. You are almost one of them, feeling the burning sun on your neck, tasting the ubiquitous dust, hearing the rhythmic, unyielding chorus of human effort. Imagine the relentless drone of pounding tools, the shouts of overseers, the murmur of countless voices, all beneath a sky that offers little shade. The air is thick with the scent of sweat, rock dust, and perhaps the faint aroma of cooked lentils. This is the unglamorous, yet absolutely vital, backbone of ancient Egyptian stone carving. Life at the quarry was, by any modern standard, incredibly arduous. These were not leisurely archaeological digs. They were industrial sites, operating on a scale that would impress even today. The workers, primarily men, toiled from dawn to dusk under the direct, unfiltered gaze of the Egyptian sun. There were no climate-controlled environments, no sophisticated ventilation systems. The heat would have been oppressive, especially in the granite quarries of Aswan, where temperatures frequently soar into the high 40s Celsius 100 seconds. Dehydration would have been a constant threat, making the provision of water a logistical imperative. You'd feel your skin prickle with sweat, evaporating almost instantly, leaving behind a fine layer of salt and grit. The physical demands were immense. Picture yourself swinging a heavy dolerite pounder for hours on end, the vibrations rattling your bones, your muscles screaming in protest. Or imagine being hunched in a narrow trench, chipping away at stubborn limestone with a copper chisel, your back aching, your knees protesting. This wasn't just brute strength. It was strength applied with precision and endurance, day after day, week after week. The work led to specific physical ailments. Archaeologists studying skeletal remains of quarry workers have found evidence of severe arthritis, spinal compression, and numerous bone fractures, testaments to the brutal physical toll. Modern safety standards would deem such conditions completely unacceptable. But in ancient Egypt, the human body was a primary tool, and its wear and tear an expected part of the equation. The dust, that ever-present companion, was not just an annoyance, it was a deadly hazard. Quarrying and carving produced immense quantities of silica dust, especially when working with sandstone and quartz-rich granite. Inhaling this fine particulate matter over years would inevitably lead to severe respiratory diseases, similar to modern-day. You'd likely cough constantly, your throat always dry, your lungs slowly hardening with accumulated stone. This is a mainstream historical fact, the silent suffering behind the grand monuments. Many workers would have died prematurely, their lives shortened by the very dust of the eternity they were creating. Beyond the physical hardship, there was the social organization. These were not, as popular myth often suggests, solely enslaved people. While some forced labor might have been utilized at various times, archaeological evidence, particularly from worker villages like Deir el-Medina and the settlements near the Giza pyramids, indicates that a significant portion of the workforce consisted of skilled and semi-skilled laborers. These individuals were often farmers during the agricultural off-season, the inundation, who were conscripted or volunteered for public works projects as a form of civic duty or tax payment. They were compensated with food, beer, and housing, and often formed highly organized work gangs. A quirky tidbit is that these work gangs often had evocative names, like the Drunkenness of Menkar or the Enduring Gang, which sometimes appear inscribed on the blocks themselves, offering a rare glimpse into their camaraderie and pride. Life in the worker villages would have been basic but organized. Housing was typically simple, mud brick dwellings designed to shelter large numbers of people. Provisions, primarily grain for bread and beer, along with some vegetables and occasional meat, would have been distributed regularly. Imagine the daily ritual: waking before dawn, a hurried breakfast, then marching out to the quarry or construction site, the long, hot day of toil, punctuated by perhaps a brief rest for a meal. Then, the weary trek back to the village as dusk settled for a simple meal and much-needed rest, only to repeat the cycle the the next day. Supervision was constant. Foremen and overseers, often equipped with staffs or whips, would ensure work continued at a steady pace. Scribes would keep meticulous records of labor, materials, and output. Discipline could be harsh, but there was also a clear hierarchy and a system of rewards and punishments. The sheer number of people involved, often thousands at a single site, necessitated highly efficient organization and management, a logistical challenge that required significant administrative expertise. Historians still argue about the precise motivations for this labor. Was it primarily religious devotion, economic necessity, or coercion? It was likely a complex mix of all three, varying across time periods and projects. Despite the hardships, there was likely a strong sense of community and shared purpose among the quarry workers and stone carvers. They were engaged in a monumental task, contributing to projects that would define their civilization for millennia. There would have been camaraderie, shared jokes, work songs to ease the monotony, and a collective pride in seeing a colossal statue emerge from the rock, or a pyramid course flawlessly laid. These men were not merely anonymous laborers. They were the direct agents of the Pharaohs' immortality and the gods' glorification. You can almost hear the sounds of their daily life, the early morning chatter as they prepared for work, the rhythmic shouts of the foreman, the constant, dull thud of stone on stone, the scrape of sand, the distant murmur of voices, and perhaps the mournful cry of a bird circling overhead. As the sun beat down, turning the rock white-hot, the air would shimmer with heat haze, blurring the figures of men toiling in the distance. The smell of dust, sweat, and perhaps the distinctive odor of fresh-cut stone would cling to you. So, as you reflect on the colossal achievements of ancient Egyptian stone carving, remember the uncounted millions of hours of human labor, the sweat, the pain, and the unwavering persistence of the ordinary men who transformed mountains into monuments. Their stories are not often told in the grand narratives of pharaohs and gods, but their legacy is etched into every single block of stone that stands testament to ancient Egypt's enduring power. They are the silent, strong foundation upon which an entire civilization built its eternal dreams. You can almost feel the ache in their muscles, the burning in their lungs, and the quiet determination that propelled them forward, day after grueling day. Having explored the visceral reality of life at the quarry face, we now confront a particularly poignant and perhaps unsettling aspect of our journey: the decline and eventual loss of the ancient Egyptian art of stone carving. You've witnessed its birth, its meticulous development, and its zenith in the pyramids and colossal statues. But, like all things, even the seemingly eternal, it eventually faded. Imagine the once bustling quarries slowly growing silent, the workshops gathering dust, the intricate knowledge no longer passed down with the same fervor. The air around you feels thick with the quiet melancholy of forgotten skills and eroded traditions. It's the whisper of an empire's gradual twilight. It's crucial to understand that the loss of this art wasn't a sudden, dramatic event like a library burning down. Instead, it was a long, slow, incremental process, spanning centuries and influenced by a complex interplay of political, economic, social, and religious changes. Ancient Egypt, as a unified, independent civilization, endured for over 3 millennia. But empires, even the most stable, eventually wane. And with that waning comes a shift in priorities and capabilities. One of the primary drivers of this decline was the series of foreign dominations that Egypt experienced, starting notably with the Persian conquest in the 6th century BCE, followed by the Greeks under Alexander the Great in the 4th century BCE, and finally the Romans in the 1st century BCE. Each new ruling power brought its own cultural influences, architectural styles, and administrative methods. While these foreign rulers often adopted Egyptian motifs to legitimize their rule, they rarely had the same deep-seated religious and cultural imperative to perpetuate the indigenous Egyptian artistic traditions in their purest, grandest forms. Imagine a Roman emperor wanting a statue in the Egyptian style, but commissioning it from a Roman workshop with Roman tools and techniques, rather than fully investing in the ancient Egyptian apprentice system. Under Ptolemaic, Greek, and later Roman rule, new construction still occurred, and Egyptian temples continued to be built or expanded. However, there was a gradual shift in emphasis. While still monumental, the quality of carving, particularly in terms of precision and depth of detail, often began to decline compared to the masterpieces of the New Kingdom or Old Kingdom. The rigorous artistic canon, while not entirely abandoned, started to loosen. Figures might appear less idealized, proportions less exact, and the carving itself sometimes less refined. This isn't to say that all later carving was poor, but the sheer unwavering consistency of earlier periods began to erode. It's like watching a long-running play where the actors slowly start to forget their lines and cues. Economic factors also played a significant role, maintaining the vast infrastructure of quarries, workshops, and highly specialized labor required immense resources and a centralized, stable government. As Egypt's economic power fluctuated and was siphoned off by foreign rulers, the ability to fund colossal, multi-generational projects dedicated solely to stone carving diminished. The emphasis shifted from monumental, enduring works to more pragmatic, perhaps less labor-intensive, forms of art and architecture. The grand state-sponsored projects that mobilized thousands of workers for decades became less common. The rise of new religious beliefs also contributed. The spread of Christianity in Egypt, particularly from the 1st century CE onwards, brought with it a different set of artistic and architectural needs. Christian churches and monasteries replaced temples as the primary building projects, and their art forms diverged significantly from the traditional Egyptian canon. While early Coptic Christian art still incorporated some ancient Egyptian elements, the focus shifted away from the elaborate symbolic narratives of pharaohs and gods to biblical themes and more naturalistic, emotional depictions. The demand for pagan temple reliefs and pharaonic statues dwindled. Imagine all those skilled craftsmen suddenly finding their traditional skill set in low demand, having to adapt or find new livelihoods. The specific techniques of stone carving themselves might not have been entirely lost in the sense of being forgotten, but rather became less widely practiced, less meticulously taught, and perhaps simplified. The deep understanding of tool interaction with specific stone types, the secret of achieving that impossible granite polish, the precise coordination of hundreds of men moving an 80-ton block, this knowledge was embodied in the hands and minds of the craftsmen. without a continuous chain of apprenticeship and monumental projects to practice on. Some of the most complex, labor-intensive techniques would have gradually fallen out of common use. This is where the quirky tidbit comes in. While the very largest-scale methods might have disappeared, simpler stoneworking techniques continued to be practiced in Egypt for centuries. For sarcophagi, architectural elements, and everyday objects, but without the grand ambition of earlier eras. The lost art isn't just about technical skill. It's also about the underlying cultural and religious motivations that drove it. When the belief system that demanded colossal, eternal effigies and intricately carved temple narratives began to wane, the purpose behind the art shifted. Why dedicate generations of effort to carving a statue of a god no longer widely worshipped, or a pharaoh no longer seen as a living deity? The meaning, and thus the demand, dissipated by the time of the Arab conquest in the 7th century CE. Traditional pharaonic Egyptian stone carving as a vibrant, state-supported art form had largely ceased. The remaining temples and monuments stood as silent witnesses to a bygone era. Their original colors faded, their inscriptions often no longer understood by the local population. The knowledge of reading hieroglyphs, a mainstream historical fact, completely disappeared for over 1,000 years, until the discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799. This linguistic loss further severed the connection to the narratives embedded in the stone, turning them into enigmatic, beautiful patterns rather than living texts. Historians still argue about the exact tipping point for this decline. Was it the cumulative effect of foreign rule, the rise of Christianity, the sheer expense of maintaining such a labor-intensive industry without the same ideological drivers? It was likely a gradual, multifaceted decay rather than a single, dramatic collapse. The knowledge didn't vanish overnight, but slowly diffused, adapted, or simply faded as the context that nurtured it dissolved. So, as you stand among the ruins of once vibrant workshops, now silent and exposed to the elements, feel the quiet sorrow of a skill that slowly withered away. The tools lay abandoned, the apprenticeships ended, the grand visions uncommissioned. The pyramids and temples remain, enduring testaments to what was, but their creation process, once a living, breathing symphony of human effort and ingenuity, became a mystery. The dust that settles on these ancient stones is not just mineral. It carries the weight of forgotten hands, unspoken knowledge, and the quiet passage of a remarkable art into the realm of history. Asterisk. From the quiet lament of a lost art, we now approach the enduring paradox of ancient Egyptian stone carving. Its profound and lasting impression on us, even millennia after the hands that shaped it have turned to dust. You've journeyed through the quarries, felt the grind of the tools, glimpsed the lives of the carvers, and understood the meticulous thought behind every form. Now, standing before these silent giants once more, you feel a connection that transcends time, a whisper echoing across the vast expanse of history, the air around you, charged with the immense presence of these creations, feels both ancient and eternally present. The legacy of ancient Egyptian stone carving is not merely architectural or artistic. It is a profound testament to human ambition, ingenuity, and a worldview deeply rooted in the desire for permanence. These structures and sculptures weren't built for a few generations. They were built for eternity, designed to withstand the relentless march of time, to ensure the everlasting existence of pharaohs, gods, and cosmic order. And in that regard, they largely succeeded. You stand here, thousands of years later, gazing upon them, and they still command awe, still whisper secrets across the sands. Think about the sheer audacity of their vision. To conceive of carving obelisks from a single piece of granite, weighing hundreds of tons, transporting them hundreds of miles, and then raising them upright. To imagine and then construct pyramids composed of millions of meticulously fitted blocks, reaching towards the heavens. This wasn't just building. It was an act of defying mortality, of inscribing human will onto the very landscape in a way that few other civilizations have matched. The enduring presence of the pyramids, a mainstream historical fact, is perhaps the most obvious and powerful symbol of this desire for permanence. They were among the first truly colossal stone structures in human history, laying a foundation for all monumental architecture that followed. But the impression goes beyond scale. It's in the quiet dignity of a seated statue, its polished surface reflecting the sunlight, its eyes gazing impassively into the distance. It's in the intricate narratives of the temple reliefs, where gods and kings interact in a timeless drama, their stories etched forever into the very fabric of the building. These aren't just pretty pictures. They are sacred texts, historical records, and profound theological statements rendered in stone. The deliberate, unchanging stylistic canon, which we discussed earlier, reinforces this sense of timelessness, creating a visual language that is immediately recognizable as Egyptian. Regardless of the specific period, the mystery surrounding how they did it continues to fuel fascination. Even with all our modern archaeological techniques and scientific analysis, there are still aspects of ancient Egyptian stone carving that defy complete explanation. How did they achieve such perfect alignment and levelness over vast areas? How did they manage to cut and polish such incredibly hard stones with seemingly primitive tools? This enduring enigma, this tantalizing hint of lost knowledge, adds another layer to their lasting impression. It prompts us to humble ourselves before their accomplishments, to acknowledge that ancient ingenuity, driven by different motivations, could achieve wonders that still challenge our understanding. A quirky tidbit that continues to baffle engineers. The precise methods for raising those multi-ton granite beams into the roof of the king's chamber within the Great Pyramid remain hotly debated, with no single theory universally accepted. The quiet legacy of these stone creations is also their power to connect us directly to the past. When you touch the cool, smooth surface of a granite sarcophagus, you are touching something that was shaped by human hands thousands of years ago, a direct physical link to a vanished civilization. When you trace the outline of a hieroglyph, you are connecting with a system of thought and belief that shaped an entire culture. They are not merely objects, they are conduits, allowing us to bridge the immense gap of time and feel the presence of those who came before us. This is the profound, almost spiritual impact of their stone art. These works also tell us about the people themselves, not just the pharaohs and priests, but the countless anonymous quarry workers, the patient apprentices, the skilled master sculptors. Their daily lives were inextricably linked to the stone, their efforts culminating in a collective masterpiece. The sheer human will and physical endurance required to create these monuments is a silent testament to their resilience and dedication. They built not just structures, but symbols of their very identity, their understanding of the cosmos, and their hope for eternity. In a world increasingly dominated by transient digital creations and disposable goods, the sheer permanence of ancient Egyptian stone carving offers a powerful contrast. These creations were designed to last, and they have. They stand as a quiet rebuke to our fleeting modern existence, reminding us of the value of durability, of craftsmanship, and of building for more than just the immediate moment. They inspire us to think about what legacies we are leaving behind, what we are creating that might endure for millennia. The echo of ancient stone. Carving resonates not only in our minds, but often in our dreams. The imposing sphinx, the towering obelisks, the serene pharaohs, they have entered our collective consciousness, shaping our understanding of ancient times and serving as benchmarks for human achievement. Historians still argue whether the monumental scale of Egyptian stonework was primarily a display of absolute pharaonic power or a genuine expression of profound religious belief shared by the entire populace. It was likely a symbiotic relationship where both motivations reinforced each other, driving the immense efforts we now admire. So, as the ancient wind whispers across the timeless stone, reflecting the setting sun over the silent landscape of Bobo Dioulasso, thousands of miles from the monuments themselves, but feeling their distant power, allow yourself to be enveloped by the enduring impression they leave. These creations are more than just rock and dust. They are the petrified dreams of a civilization patiently coaxed from the earth and speaking to us across the vast expanse of time, a quiet, powerful testament to the enduring human spirit. You can almost feel the presence of eternity etched into every surface, whispering ancient secrets in the gentle hum of the evening. From the quiet, enduring impression of the ancient stones, we now arrive at the final, serene stretch of our journey. A moment to reflect on the whispers these monuments carry across the ages and to gently drift into the quietude of sleep. You've felt the grinding dust, heard the rhythmic thud of mallets, imagined the sweat of countless laborers, and glimpsed the exacting precision of master carvers. Now, as the last echoes of their toil fade, and the moon begins its slow ascent over the timeless landscape, you are left with the profound, almost spiritual resonance of their enduring legacy. The air around you, no longer vibrating with the sounds of creation, is still and soft, carrying only the faint, calming hum of the world winding down. The story of ancient Egyptian stone carving is not just a tale of tools and techniques. It is a profound narrative of human dedication and a civilization's unwavering quest for eternity. Consider, for a moment, the sheer passage of time these stones have witnessed. They stood silent and resolute as empires rose and fell, as languages changed, as beliefs shifted, as the very landscape around them was sculpted by wind and sand. They were there when the Nile flowed freely and when it was tamed by modern dams. They saw the dawn of human civilization and continue to stand in our modern era, an unbroken link to a distant past. This is perhaps their most potent whisper, a reminder of impermanence in the face of their own permanence. Think of the patience. In a world accustomed to instant gratification, where information is at our fingertips and structures rise in months. The Egyptians built on timescales measured in decades, centuries, even millennia. A single obelisk could take years to quarry and transport. A pyramid might consume the lives of generations of workers. This was a slow art, a meditative art, where every single blow of the hammer, every rub of the abrasive stone, was a deliberate, unhurried contribution to something far grander and more enduring than any individual life. You can almost feel that deep, unhurried rhythm of their work, a slow, steady heartbeat of creation that resonated through the very earth. Their creations stand as a powerful symbol of humanity's capacity for collective achievement. The pyramids, the colossal statues, the vast temple complexes, none of these could have been accomplished by a single genius or even a small group. They required the coordinated effort of thousands, guided by a singular vision, driven by shared beliefs, and sustained by an unparalleled organizational genius. It was a true collaboration between countless hands and minds, all working towards a common goal: to build monuments that would defy time itself and connect the mortal realm with the divine. This communal aspect, this massive cooperation, is one of the most remarkable and often understated aspects of their legacy. The precision achieved with simple tools remains a source of endless fascination. We've discussed the copper chisels, the dolerite pounders, and the ubiquitous sand. Yet, with these humble implements, they achieved a level of accuracy in cutting, fitting, and polishing that still amazes modern engineers. How did they align colossal blocks with such minuscule margins of error? How did they bore perfectly cylindrical holes through solid granite? This enduring mystery, a mainstream historical fact that continues to spark scholarly debate and popular wonder, only deepens our appreciation for their ingenuity and practical mastery of materials. Historians still argue about whether they possessed knowledge of principles that we have only recently rediscovered, or if it was simply a matter of unimaginable patience and brute force applied intelligently. The answers remain hidden in the silent stone, whispering tantalizing possibilities. Beyond the technical marvels, there is the sheer artistic beauty, the serene expressions on the faces of their statues, the elegant curves of their hieroglyphs, the powerful narratives depicted in their reliefs, all speak to a highly developed aesthetic sensibility, deeply rooted in their spiritual beliefs. Their art wasn't just decorative, it was functional, designed to channel divine power, to ensure the continuation of life after death, and to maintain cosmic order. It was a visual language, understood by all, reinforcing the core tenets of their civilization. This fusion of utility and beauty gives their art a profound resonance that transcends cultural boundaries and speaks to the human soul. As you consider the journey of these stones, from their silent resting places deep within the earth to their final, towering forms, you can almost hear the soft, final whisper of those who shaped them. They were not just anonymous laborers. They were the architects of eternity, their fingerprints embedded in the very fabric of history. The dust that falls from the ancient structures, carried on the gentle breeze, carries with it the particles of their effort, their lives, their dreams. A quirky tidbit to lull you further: the very same quartz sand used to polish these statues still makes up the vast deserts of Egypt, constantly being reshaped by the wind, connecting the tools of creation with the eternal landscape itself. The sun has long since set over Bobo Dioulasso, leaving the sky a deep, velvety indigo. The air is cool now, perhaps with a soft, distant hum of the world settling down for the night. The images of those ancient quarries, those bustling workshops, those colossal structures, begin to soften at the edges, blurring into the peaceful landscape of your mind. The sounds, the thud of the pounder, the scrape of sand, the whisper of the wind over stone become fainter, receding into the gentle background hum that often accompanies profound quiet. Allow these images to gently dissolve, knowing that the story of ancient Egyptian stone carving, like the monuments themselves, endures. It is a story of human determination against the vastness of time and the stubbornness of nature. It is a story of creating beauty and meaning from the most fundamental elements of the earth. And it is a story that, even in its silence, continues to speak volumes about who we are and what we are capable of. Now, let your mind drift. The echoes of chisels and mallets have faded. The dust has settled. The ancient carvers have laid down their tools, and a profound stillness descends. Whispers of eternity, carved into stone, gently guide you towards rest.